my whole thing when I was on the stand every time was, you can't trip me up because I'm just going to tell the truth. You know, if I messed something up, I would just, yes, I messed that up. And, you know, it would never get into the courtroom because they throw it out because it's the fruit of the poison tree. That's what it's called. But as long as you document it and everything matches up, they can't trip you up with that.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this week's episode of First Case, we are continuing our conversation about seeing our patients for who they are. And like we've seen already this season, our patients make up a mosaic of individuality and cultural and social and religious diversity. And the patient population we're going to be talking about today is really no different, although this is definitely a topic, Chris, that gets you really excited.
I love criminal justice. I love forensics. It's a second passion of mine. And we are going to learn so much from David Bowman, who is just a colleague. So it's my two worlds that are meshing, and his background is fascinating. So we can dive into the criminal part. And yeah, I'm going to get a little giddy.
And that's okay. It's going to make it an even better conversation. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back with David Bowman.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Once again, I'm super excited to have yet another guest in the studio with us and to have another great conversation for our series and our season so far. But usually I have some great story about how we're connected to the guest and, you know, how we know each other, how we met, and why I thought you would be a great person to add. But today the story is not mine. It is Chris's. So Chris, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody how you and David know each other, and then we'll let David introduce himself.
Which is so exciting because usually you have this great lineup already, which makes my job so easy. But this season, we are learning all about, you know, kind of our patient aspects and things that we do in the operating room. And when we were talking about the different patients and I was, you know me, Melanie, like I relax by listening to homicide and Dateline and crimes. And that's my degree. You know, and so when I thought we need to know about what happens when we have this patient population in our operating room, and I was a trauma scrub. So, you know, this happened often in the level 1 trauma center that I worked in. I couldn't help but think of David. And David and I worked together at the same campus in Knoxville. And so unfortunately, David has to work with me on a daily basis.
And so, no.
Right. So I cornered him. In the military, we call it voluntold. So yeah, but David's an awesome resource. And so, yeah. So David, thank you for saying yes. And thanks for letting us pick your brain on this today. And so, yeah, that's kind of like how this poor gentleman got wrapped up in this today. But so I want to start by asking you, tell everyone a little bit about yourself. And I know what you do now, but how in the world did you get, wrangled into South College and teaching our legal studies? Tell us about your background before you became an educator.
Well, first, thank you for blackmailing me into doing this.
You just owe him a big favor later.
Well, obviously, payment comes in jelly beans. So
well, I happen to like jelly beans. So but no, I began working at the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office in 1999. I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. And I started in the jail as a corrections officer, and I worked there in the jail. Then I became a patrol officer, and later on became a patrol supervisor. Then I went into the investigation side of things, and I worked in the special investigations unit, where we dealt mostly with sex crimes against the elderly, against children, did a lot of kidnappings, murders. And then I was fortunate enough to get on the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's task force for human trafficking. So the last several years that I was in law enforcement, I worked with them quite a bit.
Chris is just drooling right now for those of you who cannot see the camera.
In another life, I swear that's what I did. I'm telling you. Like, I could not choose between medicine and law. Like, I couldn't. Medicine won, but sort of.
Sort of it won.
Sort of
it won.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this phenomenal background, and I'm assuming from your background that you've been in the OR more than once, or at least had to go into the OR. What was that like for you?
Well, whenever I would go in as a corrections officer, we would go in, we would escort the prisoners, the inmates, whatever you want to call them. We would escort them over for various things. Sometimes we'd take them to the ER for an ouchie, or it could have been anything from they were hanging themselves and we had to go with them. Some of the things that we would do when we would bring them over is you always have to handcuff them, shackle them, put a belly chain on, and run a chain from their feet to their wrists, because there's always the risk that there's going to be violence. It doesn't matter if they're in for a week, if they were arrested for pushing little ducks in the water, or if they're in for murder, they're inmates. And they still have that potential to flip in a heartbeat, because some of them are hardcore drug users. So you have to always be conscious of that. And even in the OR, you have to take that into account, because whenever the doctors have to sedate them, then you can take the cuffs and stuff off. But a good rule of thumb to go by was, depending on the dangerous level of the inmate, state law says that you can handcuff somebody to a movable object. So a hospital bed is a movable object. So if I didn't feel safe that, the doctor is doing his thing, even though they might be sedated, I would still get permission to handcuff them to the bed. And that's for the safety of the doctors and nurses.
Yeah, for sure. And I have been in those situations before where I've been very uncomfortable as we're waking the patient up. And I know some of it is that internal bias and just fear, because I know that I'm dealing with a prisoner. But then also, we know how anesthesia can affect our patients, and we don't know what may happen. And so having those guards there as we're waking them up was a huge peace of mind for me. Did you ever have it happen where something maybe got out of hand, or got a little too exciting? Or I don't know if maybe you're allowed to talk about that, but I'm curious.
Well, I can talk about it. I just can't use names. But
okay.
I had that side of it more on the patrol side. Whenever we would go arrest somebody for whatever reason, and they ended up having to go to the ER, sometimes they would get mad and they would attack a doctor, and then we would, either handle it right there or ask the doctor to leave the room, and we would have a come to Jesus meeting with the person. And generally it worked out good. Or one particular individual was high on meth, took his handcuffs off for the doctor to begin their examination in the ER, and he began wanting to fight. So we ended up having to drag him back out to the car. We had to fight all the way across the ER out into the car.
Man.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, obviously, as a corrections officer, you've seen it all. And one of the things that I was taught early on in my career in the operating room, very first time we actually had a prisoner as a patient, was that we were told that the police officer, the guard, whoever was there, was not allowed to tell us the crime that the inmate was convicted of, because they did not want it to influence the care that the patient would be receiving. Is that something that you encountered? Is that advice that you have heard before too?
Yes. A lot of times as a corrections officer, you don't really know what the person's charged with anyway. You're just taking care of them. As a patrol officer, obviously because you were there. And as an investigator, you know everything that they've done, because it's usually your case. And working in the special investigations unit, where, we dealt with a lot of sex offenders. So you can't tell people that, because, it's a very hot button issue. It should be. And, you don't want the doctor to look at it in a different light. And, it's safer for everybody just to not know.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think that is something that we need to keep in the forefront of our mind as we have this conversation today, because we've already talked to other guests this season about these biases that we might have when we come into a case. And obviously dealing with an inmate, a prisoner, you don't know what they've done. And I remember very clearly one time, I'm telling on a guard, I apologize, but he knew what the patient had done and he did not like it. And so he made sure that we all knew what that patient had done. And so now you have all of that other information. It was horrific too. I did not want to know. And now how do you still treat that person as a person when you know this horrific thing? And ultimately our goal is to provide safe patient care no matter who the patient is. And that's very difficult when you have those competing emotions of that knowledge of their crime. It's very hard.
And a lot of times people forget that law enforcement officers, we're people too, and the stuff that we see, it affects us just the same way it does everybody else. But should he have told you guys? No, he shouldn't have told you, but it is what it is. You can't take it back.
And you just pull it out of your brain. You're like, okay, well, I got to separate from that now.
Fox.
We will decompress in the break room and talk about this later. But for now, I got to prep this foot. And so I'm going to prep a good job.
Yeah. Well, and often, in situations like we could have the perpetrator in one OR and the victim in the other.
Oh, yeah.
And we're operating on both at the same time. And so, and in these situations, both call teams are talking to one another. Like we know what's headed and going on in both rooms. And so you can't help but understand and be curious to the entire situation. And you have to compartmentalize and handle the anatomical and pathological situation that's happening in front of you, Yeah. Okay, I have a question. And this is Chris's soapbox here. Chris's soapbox moment. Freaking medical shows, dude. Medical shows. Specifically operating room shows. Great.
Terrible.
Yeah. Like get under my skin so bad. And my dad is a criminal investigator, like worked on the private side. Most of my growing up. And he would get as frustrated as I do with the medical shows. And like literally, like number one, 10 minutes into the show, he'd solve it.
Oh, yeah.
And ruin it for everybody else. Right? Yeah. And so like he hated them. So your experience in investigations and on the police force and all in the sheriff's office and probationary and all of that, like what's your take? Like, do you get on these soapboxes? Does it irritate you the way it does me? Like,
my wife, Heather, absolutely hates to watch a show with cops because I'll be like, there's the killer. And that's not real. That would never happen that way. And she's like, would you just shut up and let me watch the show?
Will you let me just take it in, the drama and the TV and forget reality? But
yes.
I mean, I do the same thing. My kids will just, like, when they see anybody in a hospital bed, and before I can even open my mouth, I'm getting, the stink eye from every one of them. They're like, don't say it. Don't say it.
Like when you see a yonk hour suction tube taped to somebody's mouth with paper tape,
come on.
And I'm like, or tendrils, sticking out of their hair, and I'm just like,
in somebody's nose, because that's oxygen.
Yeah, and like my hives start to come up my neck. My kids are like, and switch the show, or I just get up and walk out of the room. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. We had a news reporter interview one of my students. And the first thing she said was she was inspired by Grey's Anatomy and Chris Blevins looks like Callie Torres from Grey's, like my instructor. And I was like, and I asked the news reporter, I'm like, please don't air that. And she's like, it was great. What are you talking about? And I was just like, and I lost. Like, and there we go. Like, I'm done. That was it. So I'm so glad to hear that. Okay, that made me happy. Now we can talk about what we're here to
talk about. Now we can actually get back on with the interview. Side note, go ahead.
We actually have a term in legal studies that's called the CSI effect. And it's something that affects juries where they watch CSI and shows like that, and they think that that's how it really is. So it is an actual effect in law enforcement and legal studies as a whole.
So like everything should be solved by DNA. and like everything should have been solved in 10 minutes or less, right?
Yes. They have no idea what it's really like. And the CSI effect is something I teach in several of my classes now.
Interesting. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I just never maybe connected the dots. But yeah, we are very much influenced by what we see on TV. And when we don't know about something and they present it so officially,
When you go to a jury trial and you've got people that think that this is how it really is in real life, and sometimes it's hard to convince a jury that, hey, this is real life versus that. So yeah, it's a real effect.
So maybe I should change my curriculum and I need to have a Grey's Anatomy is not real life.
It's not real
101
life.
course.
Yeah, we teach it in several of our legal studies classes.
Interesting. Well, speaking of that,
yes,
as we actually kind of get back on track here, but this is all very good and I think it's fascinating. But I'm curious then, because obviously we have the CSI and the Grey's Anatomy going on in the back of our brain, but in reality, you've got chain of custody and we have evidence collection and things that happen in the operating room sometimes. I'm curious how actually being in the operating room can affect that evidence that you might need or affect the collection of it.
It really affects it greatly. What you have to do, you have to maintain your chain of evidence. So what we would do in a situation, Chris and I talked about the possibility of somebody being shot. So I'll use that as, my example. I would get a search warrant, and I would try to get the search warrant through a circuit court judge instead of like a sessions judge, because I could get one from a sessions judge or I could get one from a commissioner, but circuit court's where it's going to end up anyway. So I try to get the circuit court judge to sign off on it, get the search warrant to get that evidence. And what I would do, I was not allowed to go into the ER, obviously, the OR, because I really don't have a lot of business in there. But, you have highly qualified nurses, doctors, technicians, and what you do is you want the technicians and the doctor to keep up with, okay, I took bullet 1 out at 12:50 p.m. and, handed it to Chris Blevins. She bagged it, tagged it, and it was handed over to David Bowman. That's the way you would do that. You just have to keep up with which bullet was put in first, and you number it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And you keep up with who took it, what time, and when it was turned over to law enforcement. That's the best way to do it.
So what happens when you don't get it that way? How does that affect you when you don't get it in a format that helps you keep the full chain of custody?
Then the chain of custody is broken, and the defense will do everything in their power to get that evidence thrown out.
Wow. Okay.
If you're working on a victim and you're trying to get the bullets that the perp put into that victim, you've just opened the door for the defense to say, well, how do we know that it came from his gun? How do we know that that's what happened? And all it takes is one juror out of 12 and the case is gone. It's done.
So I will tell you, I was reached out to as someone reached out to me in questioning what, like, layers of latex in gloves and how often we handled evidence in an operating room. And the question was, does everyone double glove or do people just single glove? And could fingerprinting be affected on handling, objects in a patient through the latex? This was, probably 7 or 8 years ago, but it was like questions about that. These were the things that I had never even thought of as a surge tech because, you're handed things that come out of a patient. And it was questioning like how many layers of gloves do people wear? And could we have, in doing that, touched things? Would anything ever be touched barehanded? These are layman things that, they were trying to understand, how the surgical team handled things. And could we have, smudged or destroyed prints and markings on the bullets and affected that. And I guess they were preparing for a legal proceeding. And I had never even thought of those implications and how that could affect a court proceeding.
It sounds like that was a defense attorney.
Yeah.
Trying, because,
yeah, it was from someone my dad knew. So go figure.
Yeah. I've been to a lot of crime scenes and I've only ever single gloved, period. And you're not going to really be trying to get fingerprints off of the bullet that's coming out of somebody. You're going to be doing, that's going to be our job at the scene. We're going to be picking up the shell casings, and if we're going to dust, that's what we're going to be dusting. It's not going to be the bullet that came out of somebody, because all a fingerprint is the oil on your finger makes a pattern. If the bullet went into somebody, there's not going to be a fingerprint there, because you've got blood, bone. If the bullet's even in one piece still.
Yeah, it was a weird question, and I was just trying to understand where they were coming from and I think they were they were wondering if the surgical team ever would have handled evidence barehanded.
Yeah,
and I was like, no.
Yeah, it's all
and
about
also gross, yeah.
Okay, so I have a follow-up. I got to jump in here. Let's go back to this whole chain of custody and us not screwing it up, because obviously the circulator in the room, we are responsible for that documentation. And I've had to do this like twice in my career. So obviously when I have to do it, I'm already on edge because I don't do it very often. And we had some kind of form we had to fill out, and it was really specific. So I'm curious, who provides that form? Do y'all show up with that form and you're like, fill this thing out? And if that, okay, so then do you like talk to the nurse in the room to tell them, hey, this is what we need? You do? Oh, phew, education. I love education.
What I would do is I would give them, if they could take them in with them, I would give them evidence bags, and I would give them the form, and, put one, and then bullet from chest cavity, taken out this time, put it in the bag and write that on it. And then, just for each individual piece. And then you can trace it back to, okay, at this time the doctor took it out. At this time, Chris Blevins put it in the bag. And then at this time, Chris Blevins gave it to me. And that is your chain of custody. And then, of course, the defense is going to call the doctor. They're going to call the nurse. They're going to call the surg tech, whoever was doing it. They're always going to call. And my whole thing when I was on the stand every time was, you can't trip me up because I'm just going to tell the truth. If I messed something up, I would just, yes, I messed that up. And, it would never get into the courtroom because they'd throw it out because it's the fruit of the poison tree. That's what it's called. But as long as you document it and everything matches up, they can't trip you up with that.
So we've talked about bullets, but there's so many other types of evidence. And it's not, so I interned at the medical examiner's office when I was in college, but there are so many other crimes than just homicide. Like there's attempted murder and there's assault, and some of those patients also make it to our operating room. And in my experience, there's the angle of a knife wound, and paying attention to trajectory and where damage was done. And all of that has to do with our charting and how all of that comes across in our medical notes. And that can have legal implications as well, right?
It can. But that's more on the side of like the state having to get an expert in there to decipher all of that, because that's way beyond what I'm capable of doing.
Yeah. But these are things that we don't ever even think about. We're just like, hey, there's bleeding. We need to fix it, save the patient. But what other kinds of things in the operating room are you a part of? And evidence, like what other, automatically I thought of bullets because that's what got most of the people in my trauma center. Knives. Like I've had many people that came in from, with some type of weapon, like sticking out of them because you leave it in, right? It's a tamponade. Yeah, leave it in.
Yep,
don't, PSI, don't take it out. Like leave them in. Well, what else comes to mind in your experience?
One of the major things that I dealt with was rape kits. I dealt with that all the time. And I had, they come sealed. You give it to the nurse. They take it in with them and, get the evidence, the swabs, any hairs, anything like that. You send the rape kit in.
We have had one that the nurse, the circulator ended up performing the steps of a rape kit while the patient was on the table. I've had that happen one time. Terrible. Have you ever had to do that, Melanie?
I have not. A lot of times the rape kits and the treatment for that is done in the emergency department. And that's usually, a lot of times where those patients come through, but that's not That's
not always
not
the case.
100%.
No,
You never know.
I've had victims that had to go straight up because it was bad, and we're not going to get into all that here.
No, it's heavy. But here's how this all ties in. Is this is heavy, and when we think about it, and our hearts break for victims of such horrific crimes, it's terrible. And where we come into that, and the role that we have a victim on our table who's already experienced something traumatic and horrific, and how can we be an agent of healing and of justice and everything else. So understanding our role and understanding what we need to do in evidence collection, understanding what we need to do if we have to do a rape kit on, and because I need training on that. I'll tell you that right now. I think I've been walked through the steps of that one time. So certainly those are things that we need to educate ourselves about so that when we have that, we can do the best by that patient, because that patient needs all of it. They don't just need safe surgical care. They need
a lot.
Good evidence collection. They need all the stuff. And so there's value.
I'm sorry. I was fortunate that the times that I had to actually send one up to the OR, there was the same nurse that was there. And, they're trained to do that. So they would take care of that part, and the doctors would do their thing. And of course, with the rape kit, that's just easy on my part. I just give the same nurse the kit. She takes it upstairs. She does her thing. It comes back sealed. It goes to the lab, and I'm out of it.
Yeah. So you have to pass the kit off. Yeah. But for those of us who are handed the kit, you're like, oh, I don't want to mess this up. And obviously we do have in a lot of facilities, there are specific designated teams, trauma teams for that. And so it's not like, it's always just going to unexpectedly drop in your lap, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have an awareness and be prepared. So, it's just, good things to talk about, and then heavy at the same time. But all right. So when we think about all of these different patient populations, whether they are victims, they're offenders, we see it all because we are in healthcare and we have to provide care no matter who the patient may be. So how, in your experience and in the things that you have seen in your career, how can we best provide care for the patient on our table, whether they're a victim or an offender?
The best thing that I've dealt with whenever I've dealt with doctors and nurses is I don't try to tell them how to do their job. And I tell them this is what I need, and I let them do what they're trained to do. Whenever I worked with them, and then we all worked well together, and we respected each other's places, this is my place over here, this is your place, you do you, and I'm going to do me. It worked out so much better than whenever everybody's trying to be the big dog. Like, I'm in charge, not you. And I always tried to show the respect that was due them, and as long as we work together and we understand each other, what we're supposed to be doing, it always works out good. That's the key. Is if they'll just, sometimes it's heck, it is. If I tell a doctor you need to get out right now because the inmate's not wanting to cooperate, then the doctor needs to get out because that's for his safety. And if the doctor tells me you need to get out because you're in the way, we're trying to do this, then it's best for me just to get out of the way.
Well, so I have a great follow-up to that because, most of these things don't happen between 9 and 5, right? So
hello, 2 a.m.
Yeah. So we as caregivers get called in and we're also skeleton crew. Like our call teams, when we get called into these situations, we're not surrounded by most of the full staff. So when we are in these situations, when we're dealing with people, prior to them being intubated and anesthetized, what from your viewpoint can we do to best keep ourselves safe in this situation before that patient? Because you said sometimes they have to be handcuffed, but are there certain things that we can do to be safe so that we can give that patient then good care?
It goes back to if the officer tells you to go out or get out of the way, get out of the way. Because we're not going to try to take over the ER. And sometimes the egos get involved, and that's where you have problems. But whenever I've had to fight one in the ER or the OR or wherever, I didn't push the nurse or the doctor out of the way just because I wanted to get close. It was because it was for their safety. And like I said, violence is always just a step away when you're dealing with inmates. But just trust in the officer and trust that they're doing what's best for you too, because they don't want you to get hurt. Because then, that just creates more problems. And it makes distrust between the officers and the staff. But I always had a good experience. I never really had a whole lot of bad experiences dealing with the medical side of things. We always worked well together. If I told the doctor you need to leave, the doctor would walk outside. When they came back in, I'd let them know, hey, we're good. Come on back in, and the problem would be solved. And that's just the way it is. Sometimes you've got, as you said earlier, you've got your victim on one side and you've got your perp on the other. And sometimes they know the other one's there and they'll try to get at each other even in the ER.
Oh, jeez.
So that can create an issue because now you're having to fight 2 or 3 at once. So
that's not good.
When it happens. And usually,
I love that.
Yeah.
Operating room, not ER, because ketamine always wins.
Right. Eventually. Sometimes that ketamine trip before they are gone. Ooh. Anyway.
It just comes down to working together and trusting each other.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So, unfortunately, as always, these conversations go by so fast. And I just want to keep talking because there are so many examples I've had in my own career that I can think back on and I can remember, and especially feeding in this theme of actually seeing who our patients are and taking care of them holistically. I've had anesthesia providers in the past who's, withheld different pain medicine because it was a prisoner on their table and they're like, they can hurt. They need to feel it. Well, no, I don't think they do. And that's not good care, but that's a common statement. And a lot of other things, especially, I think we're very sympathetic when we have a victim on our table, and we can be incredibly judgmental when we have the prisoner on our table. And it's that human nature, I understand, but moving beyond that and having an awareness of those biases so that we can still see the patient as a person and take care of them. It's difficult, but it's something we need to talk about so we can do better. But I'm curious, as we come down to the end of the conversation, because we always give our guest the final thought, what else do you want to tell us, or what do you want to leave us with as we close this conversation today?
Pretty much what I just said a few minutes ago. Just show each other respect and try to work together. Just because there's nurses that didn't like me, that I had dated in the past, and we had broke up. Just honest. I'm just being honest.
Yeah, for sure.
Wait, I want to pop some popcorn. Hold on. Yeah. I'm getting to know David real well.
Let's do the Springer show. Hold on.
Now, that was after the first divorce, so And we still had to work together, still had to be around each other. So, we all, luckily, we're still able to. There was times I was afraid to go into the ER because I was afraid I might get a syringe full of air stuck in me somewhere,
So good. Oh my God.
Drama. But yes,
so
recognizing that the nurses and the doctors, the technologists, and then the police officers and anyone else who's there, we're all there for a reason, and we have a job. So that mutual respect. Yeah, absolutely. All right. You have given us a lot to think about and a lot to take away from this conversation. So thank you so much. Chris, excellent suggestion. David, excellent. Thank you.
Put a big smile on my face. Oh my God. I'm so stoked.
Yes. See you guys. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. That was David Bowman, faculty with the School of Legal Studies at South College in Tennessee. And Chris, I have a lot to think about. I think we all have a lot to think about, and good reminders of who the patients are on the table, even when they are in the prison system or they're, or a victim of a horrible crime. A lot of things to learn about, and really to, I think, educate ourselves on our policies at our own facility when it comes to evidence collection and different things where we might be involved in a case like this. But wow, he knows a lot.
Yeah. And here's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Not that anybody's asking, but listen.
Oh, I am. Please do.
Okay. It's hard to take care of a criminal. It's hard to take care of somebody that has done wrong to someone else. But do you want that family of that victim to see justice? Do you want them to see their day in court? Do you want them to stand and be punished for what they did wrong? Then you have to get them off of your operating table. Like, you have to fix whatever is wrong with them and heal them physically so that they can be arrested. They can go through the criminal justice system so that evidence, and justice can be had so that, yes, they are innocent until proven guilty, but so that the legal system can play out. And that's where I come from. That's what I teach my students. Like, it doesn't matter who they are, but get them off your table, fix what's wrong with them, and then but also don't be a barrier to that. Like, don't let your screw up get in the way of
Justice
giving
being
that.
Served, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a different mindset, but my God, what a cool mindset. This has been so much fun.
Yeah,
so,
it is a different mindset. And yet it's helpful because we do have to, a lot of times, separate personal from the job that we're doing and the job at hand, and seeing our patient for who they are, being aware of anything safety related, but also still, like you said, getting them safely through their surgery and safely through that procedure so that we can then pass them on to the justice system so justice can be served. I think that's a good approach to it mentally. And on that very lovely note, that is going to do it for this week's interview. Stay tuned next week. We're going to actually be taking it even deeper into the idea of forensics and talking about autopsy technicians and our patients.
Yes.
There, Chris is super excited. So stay tuned. But on behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to this week's episode of First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.